I might break the internet with the controversy behind this statement, but I'm here to share that ERP cloud systems cost way too much. Let's talk about why that is. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach the third stage of digital transformation success. And one of the beauties of being independent and not affiliated with software vendors, including cloud software vendors, is the fact that we don't have to sugarcoat anything and we can tell the reality of what happens in our experience with companies that go down certain paths. And one of the things we found is that even though it's pretty well agreed and understood that the entire technology space is moving to the cloud, it's also important to recognize that there is a dark side. There is a heightened cost that most companies don't understand and they're not aware of. And in fact, so much so that long-term cloud ERP systems oftentimes end up costing more than on-premise systems. Not to say that cloud solutions are a bad thing or that you should not move to the cloud, but what is important is for you to understand what the total cost of ownership is and what the risks are as it relates to migrating to the cloud. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. The first thing we need to recognize is that the cloud software model is a movement to perpetual costs. So in other words, instead of paying upfront capital expenses one time and then a really small maintenance cost longer term, now we're shifting that model to where we have perpetual ongoing costs. And the reason this is such a big deal is because it's a lot like leasing a car. When you lease a car, the payment doesn't go away. You don't own the car at the end of the lease. You have to keep paying if you want a car. And so the fact of the matter is it's the same with cloud systems. You're always going to have that annual subscription fee. And guess what? Here's the other bad news. That subscription fee is never going to go down. It's only going to go up. So most software vendors have annual increases in cost. As you increase your consumption, you're going to increase the cost even more. As you increase your data storage and just overall usage of the system, all those things are going to cause the annual cost to trend upward, not downward. So when analyzing the cost benefit and ROI of cloud solutions, you need to really make sure you factor in the fact that those costs will never go away and those costs are highly likely to increase over time. If you're a financial type or a CFO, you might be interested to know or understand that moving to a cloud system is really shifting your cost structure on your balance sheet. So in the past, when you invested in on-premise technology, you would have that big capital investment up front, and you would depreciate that cost over time, and eventually you would depreciate or write off that asset to where the only ongoing OpEx expense you have would be the annual maintenance that you pay on that software, which used to be anywhere from 15 to 22% of what you paid for the software. So that's a difference now with cloud computing, where now instead of having that upfront capital expenditure that we're now going to depreciate, we're now saying we're going to get rid of that and we're going to move to an operating expense model. And so I talked in the last segment about how there's higher subscription costs and it's perpetual and it goes on into perpetuity. Not only that, but now it's an operating expense. So it actually increases your operating expenditure structure and decreases your capital spend, which, depending on who you are and what your financial objectives are, might be a good thing or might be a bad thing. So it's important to think of it from a pure finance perspective too, and understand that there are cost structure implications for moving to the cloud. And then somewhat related to this is also the fact that financial flexibility decreases with cloud contracts, because now you're paying into perpetuity. Yes, you have cancellation clauses after a certain number of years of using the software, but the reality is the switching costs are extremely high, and you've minimized your ability to be flexible in your financial structure. And even worse, you're now at the mercy of software vendors to dictate what kind of price increases you might see in the cloud systems over time. So this is all stuff you need to be aware of, especially if you're a finance or accounting type that's looking at the balance sheet and overall cost structures within your organization. I've alluded to this in previous segments, but it's worth calling out again as a separate segment here, in that software vendors typically have arbitrary price increases in their software over time. So when you're in a cloud environment, you are beholden to pay more when the software tells you it's time to pay more. And guess what? If you don't want to pay more, you don't have to. That's the good news. The bad news is they can cut off your access to all of your data and all of your workflows within their technology. So the reality is you don't have control over price increase. You don't have control over your costs, and those prices are going to continue to escalate over time. Now, the good news with the old on-prem model that is fading away quickly is that you can invest in this technology, you could depreciate it and write it off. You'd have your ongoing annual maintenance costs that you pay, which was fairly nominal, but still significant for some organizations. But eventually, if you decided that you wanted to stop paying maintenance, you could. And you could still keep using the software because you owned it. It was your asset. You already depreciated it. You own it. You can do whatever you want with it. Instead, we are obligated to pay whatever it is the software vendor tells us we need to pay on an annual basis. Another hidden cost of cloud systems is that there is a real cost associated with decommissioning legacy systems. You think of all the time and money that you spent investing in these systems over the years, and it's not cheap. It wasn't cheap, and it created a lot of complexity and robust capabilities that are very difficult to unwind, and it's not cheap. So moving away from those legacy systems into a cloud environment has a cost associated with that. And oftentimes you end up having to run those legacy systems in parallel for an extended period simply because you can't get the data out of the system, or simply because the new cloud systems don't do what the old legacy system did well. And so you end up with redundant costs in many cases. But regardless of whether or not or when or how you decommission legacy systems after you've migrated to new cloud technologies, there's still a cost associated with that, and that cost oftentimes gets overlooked when we look at the total cost of ownership of a cloud adoption. Another thing to consider when conducting an ROI analysis of cloud transformations is that oftentimes the benefits, the business benefits of moving to the cloud are overstated. And what I mean by this is that oftentimes software vendors will sell you on the benefits in terms of not having to maintain an internal infrastructure, not having to hire as many people or have as many people on staff, not having to have as many IT people supporting the applications. Those are all true statements, but what we often find is that those benefits are overstated and oftentimes not ever realized, because most organizations don't get rid of their old infrastructure overnight. And a lot of times it takes them an extended period to get rid of the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the people that were supporting the physical infrastructure, the people that were supporting the on-premise systems. And oftentimes those same people are needed to support the new cloud system. So the cost savings oftentimes doesn't materialize the way a vendor's business case might suggest. So it's really important to take with a grain of salt the business benefits you're being sold, the business case that you're being provided by the software vendor, and get a real objective view of what the real costs and benefits and ROI are for your potential investment in new cloud software. And by the way, companies like mine, Third Stage Consulting Group, we're tech agnostic, we're independent, not affiliated with any software vendors. We can help provide that independent view of the ROI and the true ROI of your cloud systems. Most cost, benefit, and ROI analyses are conducted at the time of an implementation. It's a way to justify an investment in cloud technologies in the relative short term. But what most ROI analyses and cost benefit business cases don't do is capture the longer term costs and risks. So much so that you start to think about 10 to 20 years out. Once you've deployed this new cloud system, what happens when you outgrow the system, the software capabilities diverge away from what it is you need, or the software vendor increases their costs so much that it's too expensive for you to be operating the system? What happens then, and how difficult is it going to be, and how much is it going to cost you to make that switching cost? And that's a really big deal, in my opinion, that we have yet to see the fallout from. I think in 10 or 20 years from now, we'll start to see that as companies begin to outgrow these systems and find that they need to move on to another system and realize that it's fairly difficult to move from the cloud to a new system. And granted, moving from any system, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, it's going to be difficult no matter what, but cloud systems are different in that you don't own the data, you don't own the software, you don't own the code, you haven't touched the code in most cases. And so making that change can be a little bit more difficult and prohibitive. And for a lot of organizations, they might find that they end up stuck in these cloud environments that may or may not be working for them longer term. So we really have to look at those long-term switching costs as well as a potential downside risk factor in cloud transformations. So what do we do about this? What do we do with these escalating costs and the fact that cloud systems typically cost more than on-premise long-term? Well, first of all, you want to recognize the fact of the matter, which is it will cost you more. You may have enough business value to justify that added cost for sure, but the fact of the matter still is going to be that you are likely to pay more for your cloud systems than you ever paid for your on-premise systems. Not true in all cases, but in many cases it is. So we can't suggest that you necessarily don't move to the cloud, because that's not a good idea either, because most software vendors are going that direction, if not all of them. So what we can do though is say, well, how do we navigate this? How do we find something that makes sense for us? And here are a few tips to leave you with that will give you some guidance to diversify and hedge your risk. One is to make sure you're not all in on one vendor. If you can diversify and have multiple systems and it makes sense for your business and your overall strategy, that's a good way to hedge and mitigate risk, because now if something happens with one of those cloud providers and they jack up the costs or they provide capabilities that you outgrow or you just need to switch out of that system, now you haven't exposed your entire organization to that risk. Now you can isolate that risk to whatever that software was built for. The other thing is really negotiating upfront and making sure you're really diligent about negotiating these contracts. Because once you lock into this contract, these are long-term contracts. They're totally different than the on-premise model. Again, because you will pay a certain amount into perpetuity for that software, and the increases over time will add up. And so you want to make sure that you have caps on how much those prices can increase. You want to make sure you're not overcommitting and overbuying software that you don't need. That's one of the worst things you can do, because now you've not only overpaid for software that you're going to have to pay for a long time. If you're not even using that software, that's even worse. So you want to make sure that you are very conservative and incremental in how you buy new modules, new subscriptions, and if anything, err on the side of under investing and buying too little, because it's a lot easier to add later than it is to try and scale back or claw back some of those costs that you've already committed to. So those are a couple things that hopefully will help provide you some comfort in knowing that you can, in fact, influence the overall cost longer term. And if you'd like more advice or you want to brainstorm ideas on how to negotiate your cloud contract, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to have an informal conversation with you to discuss that with you and your team. Now, for more information about trends in the industry and how to navigate digital transformations, I encourage you to read our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. And if you're watching this video after 2025, this is a report we publish each year, so be sure to check it out. It's an annual report that provides a number of independent reviews and rankings, technology trends, as well as other best practices to make your project successful. So I encourage you to read that. You can download it for free on our website using the QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. So I hope you found this information useful, and hope you have a great day. You think about all the time and money that was spent developing the systems over years, it's not, wait, I don't think I said that right. So when analyzing the cost benefit of the cloud, that is not true in today's cloud environment. Instead, we are, what are we? We're